my LinkedIn says it all. Like I've worked at a bunch of tech companies like Google, Meta, Databricks right now. I've been at Databricks for only about 9 weeks or 10 weeks, but yeah, I'm pretty deeply embedded in the company and I'm really having fun. Having said that, I don't represent any company. I'm always like this free radical when it comes to like speaking my mind. I've never represented my employers, present or past, and that's going to continue to be true. And I've been, been through all the cycles of, being an engineer, being an engineering manager, and so on. And I've also been through the cycles of being a high performer and a low performer. So I've seen it all, like how it feels like to be not doing well, how it feels like to be doing well, how people treat you, how people, give you more opportunities, take away opportunities, and all of that. So I hope I can answer a lot of questions around different aspects of engineering and tech careers. I think I can stop there with the intro, unless you want me to cover anything else. Yeah.
No, that's perfect. Maybe the first question I'll ask is like kind of an extension of your intro. So, you've been at Google for 9 years, Meta for 4 years, and then Databricks, you just joined. I think it's been, you said 3 or 4 months, right? And you were senior staff at Google. You became a director at Meta working on video, and then at Databricks, you're a senior director. So I'm curious if you could share the thought process behind those transition points in your career. What led to you jumping from Google to Meta, Meta to Databricks? I think a lot of people here are probably also like, hey, should I jump ship? How long do I stay at a company? Wondering if you could just provide some commentary on your own history there.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is about day-to-day satisfaction for me. And as I became part of companies that grew in size, just to give you context, like when I joined Google, it was 20,000 people globally, and I was on Carnegie Mellon campus in Google Pittsburgh, which had like 80 people. Everyone knew everyone. The head of the Google Pittsburgh office was a former professor of Carnegie Mellon. I still have good relationship with that guy. He hired me, and it felt like a really small self-contained research lab. And then I eventually moved to the Bay Area and I started working out of the Mountain View office. And even though like I had greater and greater scope, the company also grew bigger and bigger to a point where that 20,000 number became 100,000. Today, after the layoffs, Google is over 180,000 people. So the beauty of working in in a nice contained company where you understood how things worked just went away as the company grew. Then I joined. I mean, I didn't proactively apply. Someone, pulled me in, and then I did interviews, did well, went to Meta. Again, like to be clear, I even though my LinkedIn might not say it, Google and Meta are Google, Meta, Databricks, the levels are kind of the same. So I made a lateral move, and then eventually I got promoted to director while I was at Meta. At Meta, again, like I started with a 30,000 person company before the major layoffs earlier this year. Meta was over 88,000 people, huge jump, like 3x jump in 4 years. Again, I started to feel like I find it uncomfortable to be part of very large companies because the thing that irks me the most is when there are more people than problems. I always like to work in environments where there are more problems than people. That's a very common phrase, but what it means is that there is plenty of interesting work for people to do, because that's the number one source of dissatisfaction, where instead of doing interesting technical work, you're fighting with others over scope. Your managers are fighting with other managers, and it goes all the way to the VPs, and they're fighting for scope. And that's every large company goes into that phase, because it's very hard. I don't blame the companies, because these are macro organisms. It's very hard to figure out like how many people is the right number for my company. So CEOs and CTOs, they often like overshoot or undershoot. When they overshoot, they have this problem where they suddenly realize that they have hired more people than they need. And so when they project their curves of like how much money am I going to make over the next few years versus how is my biggest expense, which is my the cost of talent, how is that going to grow, then they'll see that the margin is shrinking, and then they'll be like, okay, now we need to like lay off people or whatever, or slow down hiring. And so whenever that has happened, it's oftentimes it has been too, in both these companies, it was too late for me. Then I decided I wanted to again reset and go back to some smaller place. Then I moved to Databricks. Reminds me of the earliest days of Google. 1,500 engineers, very self-contained company. I know everyone. I work with the CEO on a weekly basis. I have very good relationships with everyone I mean, the relationships are what makes my day. So I think it's like, if I were to summarize all of this in one single phrase, it is that smaller companies tend to be my preferred. Smaller spaces without the worry of paycheck is my personal sweet spot. So like super small startups worry me because I have to pay bills, and I don't have that much energy to fight for that because I have a bunch of hobbies outside of work. So to me, that's Databricks or the early days of Google. Those are my sweet spots.
I love it. You've been a senior manager, director at a bunch of these top companies. I think one more very common question I get through Taro is, how do I evaluate my manager? I think most of the population on Taro is an individual contributor. So I wonder if you have thoughts there on what questions can an IC ask to say, hey, this is a really good manager. This is someone who I want to work for. Any advice there?
Yeah, I think like the number one thing for me is empathy. How empathetic is the person? Do they really try to understand you? This is again like, this is Stephen Covey's number two advice or number three advice, which I think in this book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, which is like, put yourself in other, I mean, the paraphrasing of that is, put yourself in other people's shoes and see if you can see the world from their point of view. If your manager does that, if your manager can relate to your predicaments as an IC, because most managers were ICs at some point, if they can, if as you converse with them, if you talk to them, like how much do they seem to care about you versus what they can get out of you, um, is an early indicator. Then there are other things like, micromanagement. Like when you fail, what is your manager's response? When you know you failed, did you get a private ping saying, like, this is for someone who's already having that person as a manager, but um, you can ask their existing reports, like how do they treat you when you fail? How do they treat you when you succeed? How do they make you want to get better? How do they protect you from thrash? And when you have completely non-work related problems like a personal situation, do they understand that sometimes those things, uh, you know, uh, take precedence over everything else at work? So those few parameters, you have to like, sometimes it's very awkward to directly ask questions to your manager, but sometimes you have to find out this same information through other means. For example, asking their existing reports before you decide to join them, and indirectly asking how they think about your career growth. Very often managers don't think at all about they don't think of people as people. They think of like, oh, I need someone to solve this one problem I have. That is a very one-sided way of thinking. A good manager will invariably say, I need this person to work on this, and this will be good for them. Those who are completing that sentence and thinking about the second part, where here is what it is in it for that other person, those are the better managers typically, because they, from day one, they're thinking, does this person have a growth path? Is this person likely to succeed, or am I just like getting some short term thing out of this person? I think the mentality should show up in the conversations they have with you and with other people about you. So I would summarize it at that, but yeah.
Perfect. Why don't we go into, I'll look at like one of the top liked questions in the Q&A thread. So here's one. How do you start increasing influence in a new company? Curious Soul, who's an engineer at NVIDIA, is asking this. Yeah, I think influence is a big topic that we talk about, especially as you go from senior to staff engineer, right? Curious if you have thoughts on a framework or ideas on how you can methodically influence or increase your influence within a company.
Yeah, I think every company, whenever you enter the company, especially if you're new or in a new level, you learn about problems they're having that you did not learn about from outside. So once you join the company, you start hearing things that the murmurs, the rumors, the things that stress out your leadership chain. What are the biggest pain points that the company is facing? And it could be some combination of various things like interpersonal problems, somebody high attrition rate, or high rate of churn, or teams are not stable, there's too much tech debt, the company's competitive landscape is such that there's a existential crisis going on. So spending some time in a new role or a new company, really understanding at a deep, intimate level, like what is going on with the company's DNA, what are people worried about, and the best way to influence is like, see, the thing is, there is very rarely are these dynamic companies, people are just hanging out doing nothing, they're just always stressed about something. As soon as there's a little bit of like a slow down, something else comes and like makes everyone be super busy, super stressed, thinking about the next big thing, worried about competition, worried about where the next paycheck is going to come from, the next funding round, all of that. So understanding like where that problem is, like what is the thing that's keeping everyone up at night, and focusing on that is the best way to gain influence. Because if you now say one of the let me give a counter example. Like, let's say you are an expert at something, you come to this company and say, hey, what you're doing is all fine, but here's the other thing you should do because I'm really great at it, so how about you do this thing. This is usually very annoying to existing company leaders, because they're like, I already have like 7 problems. Now there was one problem we are not worried about, you're telling me I should worry about that, because that's a wrong way to gain influence. They'll be like, you'll get, even if your idea is great, you'll get dismissed, because the need of the hour is to focus on those 7 problem and not start like considering an 8th problem that wasn't in your radar, probably for good measure, for good reasons, because there's only so many battles you can fight at the same time. So the best way to gain influence in a new company or at a new level is to focus on the problems that the company is facing and give solutions to them, start to like manage things, start to do grunge work around that, which no one wants to do, but is important. Like important work that doesn't feel extremely exciting is one of the best ways you can get influence. Like this person is willing to like roll up their sleeve and like help us with our biggest problem. So I think that is in particular like one way. There are other ways also. Like one example is, you are so smart, or bring in us that 8th problem is so smart and so ahead of its time that it actually helps alleviate the first 7 problems in some form. Like for example, hey, you guys are solving the wrong problem, how about you do it this way? And then everyone in the room says, you're right, like we're so like deep in the weeds of solving this problem in the certain manner that an outsider view actually changes the way people think about the problem. So that's a counter example to the example I gave, where the 8th problem, the 8th approach or the 8th problem is actually a solution to the things that were keeping people up at night. So I think some combination of these are good. I'm sure there are other examples. I mean, this is what I haven't thought about this question, but like these are 2 ways I think you can sort of do, like either doing grunge work without trying to be too smart about it, or be so smart that you're changing the point of view of the existing leadership. And in both cases, people start to pay attention to you, and you gain influence. And then once you have leverage, then you can do more things with that influence. But I mean, that's a separate question almost.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and that's a helpful way of looking at it. John, if you are able to unmute, I feel like you have a really good question that you put here. Would love for you to say it directly.
Yeah, hi. So my question is this. What are your thoughts on balancing engagement with your coworkers, with your managers, with communications and meetings to promote your own career growth, and balancing that with maximizing your focus time at work, along with work-life balance? We're all ambitious. We all want to get promoted, but it's important to work in a sustainable way and also to make the most of our time. Finally, we all have lives and demands on our time outside of work. So I'm wondering, how can we balance these priorities most effectively?
Yeah, and just very timely question, because I'm directing a play, and that's opening in San Jose this weekend. So I'm like, I spend like the after this, I'm going to have a 5-hour rehearsal session in my home. So like, and I make films on the side. I do so much things outside of work that I think I'm quite well equipped to answer this question. So I think there are three different things that you mentioned. I think the answer is different for those three pairs, the three the three different combinations, right? So there are three. One is your communication. Two is the social aspects of being at work, right? How do you build relationships through meetings, through interpersonal, even having a drink with your colleagues, to the actual work you do, and then the non-work aspect of it, which is like what do you do outside of work? If you have family, you have hobbies, whatnot, right? So I think we can separate those two. I personally feel like the answer to the one and two versus three will change over time depending on how your priorities progress, right? If you just had a kid, like you can't possibly be like ignoring that aspect of your life, and so there are some hard constraints that come with having families. Um, on the other hand, like there are times in your especially early in your career, where you don't have that many commitments, where you can really stretch yourself and you can spend any number of hours that that you can sustain without burning out. So I think ultimately you have to like keep the burning out aspect in mind, no matter what phase of life you're in. Um, the trade-off between like building relationships and engineering, I have a personal view, which is that the pers- interpersonal relationships is work is overrated. Communication is not overrated, and those are two different things. The I've seen many successful people. Some people overdo this whole social aspect of work because maybe they don't have any life outside of work, and so I have had people tell me that their work, the social is their social life, period. So for them it's a bit different. If you don't need a social life at work, you probably don't need to be social at work. I think that's different from communication, because your work needs to be communicated, your roadblocks need to be communicated, your personal aspirations for career need to be communicated, your progress needs to be communicated, the success metrics, the successes, the all of that stuff need to be communicated really clearly, whether through written or verbal communication. And I'm a strong proponent of engineers that communicate well. But at the same time, going with your colleagues for a drink, going even having lunch with them on a daily basis might actually be a time sink if you're ambitious. I don't think it pays off enough, period. Like I just think that people, if you're respectful, if you're clear communication, being like here's the thing, it's very rare, no matter how many hours you put into building relationship, that they will watch your back when you're in trouble, your colleagues, because everyone is ultimately going to be like, I need to make sure that I'm doing the right thing. This is a little bit different from family relationships, where people go out of their way. Very rarely do you build relationships that are so strong that if you completely screw up at your office work, that they will save you. So I don't know. I just think that there's not enough value out of that. So I would take I would prioritize one and three, like communication and personal life over social aspects of work. Yeah, that's how I look at it. Yeah.
And are you okay to share which play you're working on, Ritendra?
I'll share it later.
Share it later. Okay, let's do
Yeah,
that.
when I feel like it's in good shape, like I'm right now embarrassed by the state of the play. So
Okay, no, fair enough.
there are 4 shows, so like I think we'll figure out if like the audience likes the first 2 shows, and then I can share with you.
Yes, makes a ton of sense. Okay, I would love to keep going. There's so many good questions here. Is Michael here? In which case, I would love, Michael, you have a good question on the Q&A thread that you can just go ahead and ask. I see Michael, but I can ask it as well. So Michael's question is, what are some of the most common people problems that you encounter as a director, a technology leader? And have you developed any tools or ways of avoiding conflict within people in your org?
Yeah, I think the number one people problem that I see is especially at leadership levels is fighting over scope. And this is also an artifact of an overgrown organization. Too many people, not enough problems. Those are one of the most uncomfortable people problems, because you can't freely talk about each other's career aspirations and how that relates to their fight for scope. Then they will everyone ends up lying in some form and saying this is good for the company, or this is like, it's not healthy. Like, that whole situation is so fraught that, and there's no great solution. Like, if you have like hired 100 people to solve two interesting problems, like, what are you gonna do? You're gonna just like, you're gonna spend most of your time on alignment meetings trying to figure out if there's a good way to divide up your work, and then those divisions, if they're not genuine, if they're not based on fundamental principles, then you will keep creeping into each other's scope, and then there'll be interpersonal conflicts at every level of the organization, from lowest level engineers. um, I see a question related to this. What do you mean by fighting for scope? So yeah, so I think let me clarify that bit, because since I said that is the most important part. The fighting for scope is about taking a problem that, is seen as important to the company, and saying that I want to solve this part of that problem, and three teams go and say, I want to solve that problem, and then there is no good way to like separate out that scope. I don't know, like, this is, we can, yeah, maybe I can follow up offline, but yeah, this is sort of a standard problem that a lot of people understand, even at every level, not just at the junior engineers level, but also, sorry, not just at the leadership level, at every level. After a few years, you would have encountered one of these where you're like, who should do this? If I do solve this problem, I'll get more credit, and that credit translates into career growth, into promotions, into bonuses. I mean, there's a real financial incentive associated with getting that scope. So people tend to do that because we are all like social animals, and we want to do what's right for ourselves. So um, the way to avoid this, first of all, uh, a lot of it, you cannot blame yourself if your company is bloated, because you only have so much control over what you do. um, my personal thing, which I don't necessarily recommend everyone to do, is to, at some point of time, when you find that this problem is not solvable through trying to divide up the scope, you basically find another job or another role within the same company. There are companies do have this thing where parts, not all of a whole large company have the same kinds of problems, so you can move yourself to a different part of the company where this kind of problem is far less prevalent, and that immediately makes your life better. And so,
Actually,
yeah,
quick follow-up there. I mean, I think one
yeah,
of the things I've shared with the group is like
yeah,
scope and opportunity is unevenly distributed within a company, right? There are going to be parts of a company, especially big tech, Meta, Google, Databricks, I'm sure, where certain teams or orgs are growing faster compared to others. So I wonder if you have heuristics or ways to identify what are those fast growing opportunities for an IC or maybe even a manager.
yeah. I think there's two forces at play, right? One is like, how visible is that problem or that area within the company, because the CEO keeps talk about it, or the press keeps talking about it. So you immediately start to associate, what is considered successful with, or what should be considered successful with, where you are. The other force at play is how much better you can make that thing. That is, so oftentimes every project is, if you plot a point for every project or every team within a company, of like visibility versus, how much, what's the delta that you can get by working in that area, you might have a very interesting scatter plot. And if you have a very small impact in a very crowded space, it will not be visible, no matter how visible that whole area is. So if you plot that point of like, how many people are do the simple math of like in a company of 100,000 people, how many people are working on, like, for example, a few years back, Google had this big push for the assistant. Google Assistant is everywhere because Alexa was growing, and then Google decided that, we needed to, like, we were doing search for so long, we ought to be really good at assistant, but no one is talking about assistant. Everyone is talking about Alexa, and they're talking about Siri, but the assistant wasn't in the radar in the public. So there was a push to like make assistant big. At some point of time, a few years or a few months down the line, it was very clear that assistant teams were all overstaffed everywhere. So even though everyone is talking about it, you just have very little influence on that. So at that point, you should probably see like where can you have more impact, where there is not such a high density of people interested in it, but one that is still important to the business outcomes. So this is the tricky bit where we often conflate what the CEO or the VP of your area keeps talking about to what is uh, important, because you think that if your areas is not being talked about at senior leadership level, that it's not important. But this is one of the biggest mistakes I think junior engineers make, where they think that their value is tied to the single narrative that the topmost leaders of the company are talking about. The reason they talk about, they disproportionately talk about the new things that they want to move toward. That does not mean that the bread and butter of the company is not important. Classic example is ads. Google and Facebook, each of them have their core business that is just like the portion of the business that's making all the money. How many times do we hear CEOs talk about those things? Those are the, if even 20% of those parts of the company went away, like, they won't be able to fund all the cool stuff that they're working on. So it's like, it's almost like, play the inverse game of what is the CEO not talking about that is still important. And that is probably a place where there is not going to be a ton of competition in having a ton of impact, but it's going to drive most of the business impact in the coming months and years. And you go there, you jump to that part of the company and be successful. Yeah.
Okay, so many good questions, both in the Zoom chat and here. Let me do one more from Rashmi that came in through the Q&A on Taro, and then maybe we can have someone else jump in. I don't think Rashmi's here. So her question, one of her questions is around leadership presence or executive presence. This is especially something that I've been asked about, like from senior to staff. That particular promotion, I think you're going beyond the team and you're trying to influence or present to leadership beyond just the local area. So I'm wondering if you have thoughts about like how do you develop that? What characteristics do you find?
Yeah, I mean, I got feedback pretty early on in my career that I don't have executive presence. And part of that problem was I had this habit of complaining about everything. Like, I was very blunt and I was very direct about things that were wrong with the company. And executive presence is actually like, it's funny, put very simply, these are people who can take instructions and get the work done without too much complaints. It's an extremely blunt version of executive presence. Like, executives at some level stop seeing people as people. They start to see them as, this is my army of people that will get this done. Which subset of this army can I talk to get the things I want? Because there's a disconnect between what senior leadership think on a daily basis and what engineers at the ground level do. Senior leaderships are constantly thinking strategy in a way that ignores the technical aspects of why that strategy is hard. So then they will work with those emerging leaders in the company that are hungry to grow, that are good at listening to their leadership and can execute on those ideas. That's one aspect of engineering executive leadership, which means in a room with a CEO or a CTO or a senior vice president, when someone says, who knows this answer? Who is able to get the right answer respectfully? Who's able to take action items and follow-ups? Who doesn't argue back too much? I mean, they make certain good points, but they don't argue back all the time. And who sort of take those pieces of feedback, those ideas or those strategies, turn them into more actionable things and come back with concrete things. Like to me, that's the cycle of listening carefully to your leadership, being respectful, being mostly listening, talking less, coming back with concrete plans to execute on those strategies. In my mind, that is the most like concrete way to represent executive. I think executive presence is probably going to look different for a PM, for a designer, like for an engineer, it's this. And I think it. So then they can just visualize you as one of their peers. Someone with executive presence is someone who can rise to through the ranks, and that CEO or senior leader can keep having those same kinds of conversations and execute on their strategy through them. The opposite of this is, as I said, like someone who's too focused on the technical aspects of what this leader is saying, not able to rock the sort of the business outcomes. Again, like what are they really trying to get you to do, and where are they coming from? Those who understand this tend to develop faster executive presence. Yeah. So sometimes the one very common mistake we make here is we think that being smart in the room with senior leaders is actually a good thing. They don't care about how smart you are. They use their own techniques to like figure out if you're smart enough to do what they need you to do. But sometimes we raise our hand and say, hey, here's a very smart question I have for you. This will stump you. And it almost always backfires. uh, because if you think you have thought of that problem, that executive has thought of that problem 10 times and heard that problem from 20 other people. So you don't stand out as unique, you just come across as a pest in that setting. Unfortunately, that doesn't help you grow your new career.
I love it. I feel like that issue of like speaking at the right level of abstraction for the audience is something that a lot of engineers struggle with. So I think what you said is really relevant. I see Chia Maka on the call. I feel like I'm probably not saying that correctly, but it's a question about early career folks. Do you want to just go ahead and unmute and ask the question?
Yeah.
And also,
yeah.
could you also just say your name for us and say like where you work? I want to make sure I get it correct that next time.
All right. My name is Chiamaka. It's just Chiamaka. So I had a question. I was kind of curious about how like his journey was in his early stages of his career. What companies he worked with after he graduated from university, and also how he kind of decided the niche in software engineering that he wanted to like dive into or get into deeper. Like, just career advices for early stages in software engineering career, basically.
Yeah, I can answer that very quickly. This can be a very long answer, but I'm going to keep it short, right? So I graduated with a PhD straight out of undergrad. I've never worked before, so I wanted to work in the industry. And I did not do very well. Going from academia to a company like Google was a struggle for me. I got a very poor rating in the third evaluation cycle, and I felt that I didn't quite understand the difference between academia and industry. And so it took me a while to learn, and it has not slowed me down in my career overall. Like, admitting your mistakes, not being too proud of who you are and what you're capable of, and taking feedback from, people around you who like you have to choose whose feedback you want to take, because there are plenty of people around you who don't necessarily have the right uh, uh, intention for giving that feedback. We have to figure out whose feedback you take early on in your career, who is rooting for you and who's competing with you. Like sometimes your peers are actually competing with you. You need to really know who's early stage. Everyone is rushing, like especially in competitive places like Google. Everyone is like early on, like everyone wants to establish themselves. You have to figure out whose feedback you take, how you incorporate that feedback into your the early shaping of your career, your mindset. Again, like there are lots of things that you only learn through experience, and the more you do, the more you learn, and there's true value to experience that schools don't teach you. So again, like And my choice on machine learning as a career path was like, came from the fact that I was very fascinated by statistics and probability. Literally my favorite. I have been coding since I was 8 years old, so coding was not nothing new. But I suddenly realized that like probability and statistics is like such a powerful thing that it creates a superpower for you, because most computer scientists are not very good at probability and statistics, and machine learning is the foundation of machine learning, and AI is probability and statistics. So it was very obvious to me, like if you have your own interest in some other field and you see the intersection of computer science and that field, something might emerge. For example, a lot of my friends got into bioinformatics who were in computer science early on because they found it fascinating. They had some family members who were diagnosed with like, genetic disorders, this, that, like there's so many reasons that inspire people to pick a subfield within computer science. You have to pick the one that resonates most with your personal story, personal journey, and your strength.
And just a quick follow up on that. I wonder how, because you clearly have this deep knowledge of ML and statistics. How do you balance that with the need of the hour for the company? I remember at Meta, there was a time where they were really desperate for Android engineers, or for another company it might be a particular domain. And so I think a lot of people come in and say, hey, should I just do the thing that is most needed by the company? Or how do you balance that need with, hey, I have this deep background or deep passion for a subject?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think there's a trade-off between your expertise and how unique it is relative to everyone in that field. Like self-awareness really goes a long way in making the decision you asked, which is, how good am I relative to my peers in this field such that I can stick to this? And that is the most value I can provide to the company, versus how much of a generalist am I, where I'm much better off doing the thing that the company needs, because if I just go away from this thing that I was working on to this thing that the company needs, nothing will be lost. And so it's a matter of like your level of expertise and knowledge, where you basically identify yourself either as necessary in the field you love, versus you're doing it for yourself versus you're doing it for the company. You have to like decide that. If you're a mediocre backend engineer who can be a very valuable mobile engineer for a while, to go do that because the company will thank you for it. If you are the world expert in AI or whatever, or distributed systems, and there's a need for mobile engineers, don't move. If you move, something will collapse over time. So stay there. I think it's a simple way to put it. Yeah.
I like it. And by the way, there are a lot of questions in the Q&A. That's the thing that Ritendra, after this, I think if you have time, Ritendra will go ahead and answer those questions asynchronously as
Yeah,
well.
keep them coming. Keep them
So-
coming.
so-
I have my rehearsals after this. I can't do anything tonight, but I think yeah, over the weekend I will try to answer all the questions via chat. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah. Jordan, I see a good question from you. Do you want to ask that if you unmute?
So we're going opposite of
Yeah, let me, oh, okay, cool. My sound works. Yeah, my question is, how do you go about building relationships quickly with new people? If the answer is one-on-ones, then how do you make your one-on-ones as valuable as possible?
Yeah, I think one-on-ones are my favorite kind of communication. Team meetings are the large group meetings are the lowest rank in that order. And then small group meetings are somewhere in between, right? Like as the meeting size grows, I find them less and less useful, except in like one-to-many communication forums. For one-on-ones, I think you can be extremely vulnerable, and you can also build the strongest possible personal relationship that is possible. Like, for example, in one-on-one settings early on, you can really establish you actually can be pretty negative. I actually find it quite valuable to cut the crap and go straight to the things that are bothering you, and the things that are asking others what is bothering them, like asking the hardest questions that they would never talk about in a wider forum, but they could confide. And the way I do this is by being vulnerable myself in these one-on-one settings. They say, hey, I just joined the company. I'll give you a very concrete example. I joined Databricks, and in my very first one-on-one with someone, I said, shit, I think I don't know enough databases to be in this company. I think I need to do something about it. Otherwise, I'm gonna get fired very soon. Like literally, this is how I started the conversation, and they're like, "Don't worry about it. The thing that you're working on is not as bad." Like, in fact, that person probably felt a little bit threatened by the overlap in scope or whatever. There's a new expert in the company coming in. Um, like their stance completely changed, and it suddenly became a matter of, oh, this is a human being with a bunch of vulnerabilities, which a bunch of concerns. I can actually help them, and in turn later on maybe we can help each other. And so you create that bonding happens through like um that sort of like exposing your weakest fears, or your deepest fears in that forum, something that you cannot do outside of one-on-ones. So I would leverage one-on-ones to be extremely like transparent, vulnerable, open, honest, direct. Even say things that are almost like taboo, like, hey, I'm actually worried about you coming in and doing this area because I thought I was going to work on this. Say that. Say it out loud. Then it'll be like, so it'll make you all uncomfortable for a while, and then you'll know each other at a different level, because outside of that you're talking to each other in very superficial terms in most cases. So you can never form these deep bondings without exposing your inner fears and yourself. um, but I think you have to be a little bit careful about doing this with everyone. Not everyone is going to receive this kind of thing well. So I wouldn't do this point blank. I think you want to like assess, you want to use your sixth sense to like figure out who is going to be receptive to this kind of vulnerability, and who's going to treat this as some source of some notion of weakness. Oh, there's a new leader who's really weak and blah blah blah, I can't respect this person anymore. There are some, 5 to 10% of the population will be like that. You have to avoid this. So this is not like a point blank recommendation for everyone. You have to use your judgment to figure out like who is more likely to uh, you know uh, take the vulnerability in the right way, and build on top of it as they build, and they have an incentive to build relationship with you as well. If they don't, then this is not going to be necessary. So you can just, you might not even need a one-on-one with such people. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I definitely relate to those experiences and those like building up relationships as well. I'm curious, how do you do, how do you make sure that it doesn't come off as complaining on a recurring basis though?
Yeah, I think you have to like almost keep track of how much you're complaining versus how much you're saying positive things. And because ultimately people form an average opinion about you, right? So the average should be like, here, like, I think the overall human society is positively biased, at least in external communications, right? So I think you may want to like have some kind of 80-20 or 70-30 rule for yourself, where 70% of the time you're saying things, but overall you're very authentic, and 30% of the time everyone is dealing with some kind of shit. So if you express that, you should be fine. I think their average opinion of you would not be. There are people that go overdo this, like 80-20, 80% complaining, 20% saying something good. Those people are also very difficult to deal with. Don't become like that, but keep track of how much your is that mix for you, and for every pair of relationships you have, um, in some
Got
sense.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Thanks, Ritendra.
Wait, there's a lot of good things. I got a DM of someone who wants to ask a question. So I'll bundle up two questions I got messaged, unrelated. The first one is about, hey, I have a really difficult relationship with my manager. I might be on a PIP, or I might get like a meets most expectation rating, or something below the average. Do you have general thoughts on, hey, how much should I try repairing that relationship versus switching teams? And also, I think a related question is like, because you're operating as a director or senior director, do you have thoughts or recommendation? Like, can you share how much does the senior leadership know about this particular mid-level or senior engineer is struggling? And how much is their reputation going to be kind of maybe messed up if they, how much of reputation spreads to the higher leadership? And the second question, unrelated, is someone asked about finances. So, I mean, obviously you're probably making a lot more money now at compared to when you started out at Google, certainly, or even at Meta. And I'm curious about how your relationship to money has evolved, or if you have any thoughts about that as you climbed the ladder.
Yeah, on the first one, sorry, there's so many questions. The first one is around a bad relationship with the manager, close to PIP, trying to repair that relationship. I think you have to make a judgment call of whether they've already made up their mind and it's just a matter of time before they just boot you out or like push for that to happen versus genuinely interested in turning you around. I think this is something that I developed a sense for over the years. Like for example, like this is one kind of body language that works. You come up with an idea for your own self, see how your manager reacts to it. If mostly what they're saying, if you see them enthusiastic, like, hey, I've been slow, here's my explanation. Here is what I plan to do to turn it around. If you have a really compelling story there and your manager has a lukewarm response to it, and to the best of your assessment, your idea is a good one, but your manager's response is off-putting or like, feels like it's a little bit different from how you expected him to respond to. More likely than not, they've given up on you at that point, and they're just like trying to find an exit for you. I would make that judgment call. I've seen more cases of near pip turning into pip than near pip turning into like a positive story. Those are rarer cases. So your odds are against you that you will be able to turn it around just purely based on statistics. So then you have to make that judgment call whether you're in that minority where your manager has your best intentions and are trying to turn it around versus not. So I hope that helps. There's so much I can talk about on that topic, but like this is like the simplest thing I can say about it. Regarding whether that information bubbles up to senior leadership, absolutely does. Like it's ridiculous how quickly, especially if in a company where less than 5% are in that situation, the news spreads like wildfire. So, but it doesn't spread sideways. It only spreads up your reporting chain to some extent. Like probably doesn't go to the VP level for an L3 or L4 or an E4 engineer, but an E6, everyone knows about L6s and above, by the way. Like my CEO at this company is Ali Godsi. He's like the CEO of Databricks. He knows about all the L6s that are not doing well. He knows them by name and he knows who's doing well and who's not. So it really depends. Like Mark Zuckerberg didn't know any L6s. He probably just knew the VPs. Like it depends on which leader we're talking about here. But either way, like at least up the chain to some level, there is the news spreads that there's this person who's not doing well. So you might as well shift the branch. If you, for your next gig, if you're internally transferring, move to a different branch in the or at some higher level, like so that you can start afresh. The next question was around money. It's funny, and on Monday I was invited to a podcast called Tech Careers and Money, where I spoke for an hour about exactly this topic. So that podcast will come out, and maybe you can link to it, Rahul. But in general, beyond a certain, we all know this, beyond a certain amount of compensation, money stops to change your quality of life. I don't believe that number is 70,000, which I actually wrote an article on LinkedIn about how that 70,000 number is bullshit. In today, if you're in the Bay, really dependent on your situation, you probably need a high, you need a certain, like, half of, so you have your magic number and you pick that number, and beyond it, you prioritize your daily life. I personally am at the state where I prioritize my my day-to-day happiness over money. But yeah, I do think that the companies I work for always paid well, so I'm not a good person to talk about struggling with money, except during grad school, where I was making $1,300 a month, and I could not afford most things, and it was very hard for 5 years. So I would not wish graduate student life for 5 years, because that's the only time I really struggle with finances.
Okay, that's illuminating. We have, maybe 10 minutes left, I would like to prioritize questions based on folks who are able to unmute and ask it directly. So I talk less and we get more audience interaction. So there are a bunch of questions here in the Zoom chat, and there's some also in the Q&A. But can anyone just unmute and ask if they're able to?
Very well, but she is very athletic.
Aaron,
I can
or
ask Rahul.
yeah, Raghu, go ahead. Yeah.
All right. Hi. Thanks so much for the talk. Really appreciate it. A question that I have for you is related to like networking and building the relationships, which is, we know that quite a lot of folks engage in this the networking part during their job search, but usually they kind of fall off the tracks once they change job, they start a new job, either because not enough time, or they think that, okay, I should probably get it back once I'm looking for a job again. But what are your thoughts and suggestions on how can one continue to invest in building relationships, long lasting relationships, in while balancing job and life?
I am not very good at networking, to be honest with you, and I don't also. This again, my personal opinion. Um, I haven't gotten jobs through networking in my career. The best kind of, I mean, it helps to some extent, but it's there's an alternative to it, which is doing such good work that the word of your good work spreads without you having to actively network. If you're running out of time to actually actively network, use all your energy to do such good work, communicate about that work so well, be an inspiration to your peers, be looked up by your, the people around you, and also like noticed by your leadership. I think then in those circles, then you get talked about. But in software engineering, there's very objective ways of assessing people's abilities that precludes the need to have very strong networking skills. So if you're not able to do it, that's okay. I think a lot of the networking opportunities don't pay off as much. It's again one of those things where it's a bit overrated compared to how much valuable it is. It might get you like your resume screened because someone just shared your resume, but beyond that, again, it becomes a very objective thing, because purely based on networking, your references, the networking will not generate references for you. So you'll end up having a weak upper hand, but not much. Yeah.
Most people pronounce it as an
Anand, do you want to ask your question?
average.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Rahul. And thanks, Ritendra, for doing this. My name's Anand, and I actually joined Databricks. How do I lower my hand here? I actually joined Databricks last week, so I'm brand new. And I joined as an experienced hire. I joined as a mid-level hire from Robinhood. And it's my first time onboarding as, not someone who's coming from industry as opposed to coming from college. And so I'm wondering if you had any advice on, I feel like I see a lot of questions about, how do you increase your scope as a senior engineer and so on. I'm wondering if you have any advice on how to be an effective contributor to the team at my level, particularly with regard to getting started in the first few months. I feel like at Databricks, there's so much to learn.
Sorry, I didn't quite. So you're distinguishing between new grads and experienced hires. Like, what's the unique thing that you're talking about here?
Basically, I'm asking, as someone who's going through onboarding for the first time as an industry hire at Databricks, I'm wondering if you had any advice.
No, I think there's nothing specific to Databricks. They all come across as very similar companies. The thing is how big is the company and how is your influence. But at the very beginning, if you're at the mid-level, it wouldn't matter. Like all the companies are very similar. I would just like really understand the DNA of the company, the culture of the company, what is seen as success, what is seen as like, failure or a source of concern. Like, I'll give you a simple example. Like different companies have different tolerance for causing sevs, right? Different companies have different uh, levels of celebration over launches. Different companies have different DNAs around competition. Like, Google had no notion of competition. Databricks has a strong notion of industry competition. So the thing you talk about reflects how well you understand the DNA. So the technical stuff you learn for sure. The DNA, you should take the time to understand the DNA of the company, what resonates with your leadership, what resonates with your peers. Spend unusual amounts of, spend a ton of time on that. It'll do wonders for you. Like your conversations with people will just change in characteristic if you understand the DNA of the company. Without that, you'll end up sounding like a generic engineer who has no clue. But with the understanding of the DNA, you're gonna, everyone will resonate with you quickly. Like I'll give you a very silly example, right? When will Databricks go IPO? 2 years from now, no matter what the time is. It's a joke. It's a running joke, right? Uh, so if you said that, everyone will be like, okay, now this is one of us, and like, okay, you get the DNA of the company. It's a bad example, but it's also one that illuminates like the kind of thing I'm talking about here. Yeah.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, maybe Aaron, we can do you, and then I know at that point people might have to drop, so then we can just put links and follow-ups one last time. And if you have additional time, Ritendra, we can do that. But I know you have a play to go to, so let's maybe do Aaron, and then we can see how long that takes.
Oh yeah. My thing is pretty much like a rehash of what you said about you being a low performer for like your third quarter at Google or such. My question is like, have you like ever encountered like feedback that mainly came across as more insulting rather than actual feedback? And if you did, how did you like bounce back from that? Because I feel at that point, if you don't have real actionable feedback, then how can you realistically try to show your team that you want to meet your standards or something?
So you're talking about feedback that is insulting versus useful, or
That comes across as more insulting than useful, or such like broader, such like they say something like things like inadequate or this is flat, in a sense where it feels like they have no real faith in you rather than saying, oh, he can grow, but you need to improve upon your knowledge
yeah,
of this
I get the
architecture.
question. I think this is very similar to the point I was making earlier with managers who has lost faith in you. I think the use of the language they use, the body language they use, both the language and the body language that they use, you have to learn. You have to fend for yourself. Like you have to protect your well-being, mental well-being. You don't want to be subject to this kind of criticism that is not well intentioned, that is not meant to be for the sake of growth, but meant to make you feel small about yourself. I really think that's toxicity in some sense, right? So I think you should like detect it and learn to get rid of it. I definitely have developed a thick skin over the years. I know who's saying what with what purpose, because everyone is incentive driven. Some people are saying this because they want you to grow. Other people are saying it because they've given up on you, or they find value in making you feel small, like they win at your expense. And sometimes that criticism makes them feel superior. You have to like understand like what is their story, like are they in a competitive space with you for them to do this? Are they going to benefit from making you feel small? Like you have to develop that muscle for understanding who's coming at it with what mindset, and learn to ignore feedback that is net negative for you. I don't know if that made sense, but it's like this is a
Yeah,
it's a big topic. I find it very hard to explain it very well. Yeah.
yeah, definitely. I got like that for my first cycle, and then second cycle it was slightly better, but still kind of broad in a sense. Like this didn't have. Wait, how come I wasn't given this type of feedback before or whatnot? It just seemed like rather than giving me the feedback for me, it seemed like it was more like things they wanted to complain to my manager about, and instead of really talk action into me. Because when I saw said feedback, I was like, wait, what? I thought they said
Yeah.
from my end everything seemed like, oh, you're learning, it's fine, don't worry, just keep up this up, and then but then when you see that review, you're just like, wait, they really felt like this about me.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to unpack there, Aaron. I feel like how about this? If you haven't already, please ask that question on the Q&A, and then I want to make sure that, you know, Ritendra, you have this 4-hour rehearsal tonight, right? So want to make sure you have enough time to.
I can
Oh,
take
yeah.
one or two more questions.
Oh yeah,
And
Okay.
oh yeah, yeah. Sorry if I was a bit off tangent. I just wanted.
no, that's a
I
good
got
question. Yeah.
quick question.
Yeah.
Probably
Okay.
take
So
two more questions. Yeah.
okay, let's do two last questions. So I let's do VA. You can go ahead. We'll do one more after that.
Hi. So first of all, thank you so much for doing this. I had a question for from the perspective for a mid-level or senior engineer, how to go more strategic, how to think high level, how to figure out like the big picture stuff. Any advice on that front?
How to grow, how to move to the big picture stuff.
How to be more strategic about the projects to take, or um,
Yeah.
basically be more efficient. Essentially what I'm trying to say is that for me, I spend like 40-50 hours, maybe 60 hours sometimes,
Yeah.
but what I feel is that I'm not as efficient as I could be if I work on the right projects, and
Yeah.
and I'm not sure how to identify those.
Yeah. I think this is a very hard and very common question. Like, how do you switch from doing something that someone told you to do, or following some kind of like roadmap or pattern that you've seen before, to something where you turn the table and become the person deciding strategy around you, and also using that to decide to strategize your own career. There is, again, this is a very rich topic. I don't know if I can like answer it in such a short period of time, but one thing is generally true, that if if you start to see the company and your role in the company, um, which part of that company's big picture are you, and what value do you bring, it changes the perspective that you have. A lot of times engineers that are more junior tend to think about technical problems to solve that are interesting, instead of the problems that are important and valuable to the company that may not be as interesting. So just that mental transition from what is the objective function that you have, from I'm going to continue to do interesting work, to I'm going to continue to do the work that matters to this company and that changes the company's business outcomes, that will give you the arsenal to think differently about your career and be more strategic. Because ultimately there is a huge disconnect between how most engineers think about themselves and how senior leadership think about them, and that gap is what causes a big difference between junior and more senior people. For example, I'll give you a simple example. A lot of junior engineers hate technical debt. They're like, oh, this is not a great way to solve this problem. But at that period of time for this company, what if the tech debt didn't matter? What if the outcome mattered? How much are you able to like switch from thinking about the engineering aspects of your work versus the strategic aspects of your work? If you really thought strategically, you would live with shitty code. You would live with increased technical debt, but you would have helped build an outcome that everyone celebrates you, and then find an opportune time in the future to fix the debt. Of course, reality is most of the time tech debt just keeps growing and it never gets solved. But just giving this as an example of how your point of view and your perspective can help you be more strategic, and that I think is a very common gap.
I see. Thank you.
All right, for the last question, maybe I actually love what Vijay had written in the Q&A. So I'll try and paraphrase it, and Vijay, if there's something I missed, feel free to chime in. But last question, I feel like, you know, you're clearly an industry expert when it comes to AI ML. And so kind of two-part question. One is for engineers who want to keep up to date with this field, which is really booming. Do you have particular people or you know, journals or places you go to keep up to date with that? And secondly, for a lot of people who are not going to be full-time working on AI, but our job as engineers likely will be changed by the use of AI tools. I'm curious if you have thoughts on that, or how engineers can best you know, stay up to date with the rapid changes that are happening with
Yeah.
ChatGPT or Copilot, things like that.
I think the first question is, I don't think of myself as an expert because I think of myself as experienced. So I find new problems that, you know, a lot of people miss, but because I've seen those patterns before, but I don't consider myself as an expert. Second is, I think the question around how do you keep up to date? There's so much going on. Like everyone, I think if you hear like Mark Andreessen talk about you know, AI, or Ben Horowitz, I listen to those people. They're very sharp. They say a lot of interesting things. Everyone is saying the same thing. Or even Fei Li, who's like arguably a godmother of AI, like she was also saying she can't keep up with all the archive papers that are coming out in the field of AI and ML. I think don't try too hard to know everything, because it's always going to be depressing. As you learn something new, someone will. The pace of innovation around AI is so rapid right now that it's pretty much impossible to keep pace with it. But the thing is, in the industry, it doesn't matter if you know everything. It's about whether you know the right thing around the problem that you're solving. And so zeroing in on the space, doing your research around the problem you're being asked to solve. And there are so many places. Like I listen to certain podcasts which expose newer ideas. I read, I mean, LinkedIn is a good place where these days a lot of very interesting outcomes of AI research is turning into these like meme-like GIFs and so on, or little videos that, oh, see how I did that, I replaced the background and now the video is good. Those are cool. Like I think those do bubble up, like the fascinating ones do bubble up. The more detailed ones that don't have fascinating visual outcomes don't bubble up as much, but you also probably don't need it until you are actually working in that field. So don't stress too much about knowing everything about everything. Focus on the parts, the areas surrounding the thing you're being asked to solve, because unless you're interviewing, mostly the good companies will ask you fundamentals, and the bad companies will ask you specific details about specific things that came out, so you know where to go. If you don't get a job at a company that asks you knowledge-based questions about AI, like it's probably a good thing for you not to join such a company. Recently, I interviewed at a company last year. Last year I was interviewing. This year I didn't interview much. Last year I was interviewing, and someone asked me, write the equation of logistic regression, and I had an error in that thing. And they're like, oh, this is a terrible person. Cannot hire. I got rejected right away. So like, you know, I was like, okay, if that's how you're gonna evaluate me, I'm cool with that. Like, I mean, it's a different matter that I should know this, but you know, who's using logistic regression anymore anyway? Like, you know, we've not been using logistic regression for classification for the last 6-7 years in the state of the art ML tech. And final question was around like, sorry, what was that question? You had a follow-up to that.
It was basically for people who are not necessarily wanting to be at
Yeah.
the state of the art
Yeah.
for AI. How do they
Yeah.
keep up, or how will they
Yeah.
adapt? How should they adapt to the AI
So
tools?
the two things. One is like copiously use Copilot-like tools to sort of autocomplete code, make your life easier. Use those kinds of tools to debug your code, to write some of it for you. Like don't be shy to use it as much as you can, so that you are like an AI assisted computer programmer rather than, like, I think the meme that goes around is like, it's not like AI is going to take your job. It's people who have who are AI assisted are going to take the jobs of those who are not AI assisted.
Yeah.
So focus on the farmer, be the farmer, do more of that. And then yeah, Vijay's question, A16Z podcast, they also have the new podcast called Mark and Ben Show, where they ramble for 2 hours, but it's good information. You have to sift through it. And then there's also some others I can talk about. Like I also listen to the Harvard Business Reviews, like IdeaCast, which is less about pure tech, but about like people, psychology of engineering and technology and business. So that's very complementary to these kinds of purely technical conversations. And the other thing I wanted to say was, like, in addition to using Copilot and such to write code, I also think you could do a little bit of actual engineering around AI, even if you're not an expert, by doing things like prompt engineering with AI. And see, like, prompt engineering is one of the easiest ways to get into AI tool building, where you're literally just learning to like write good prompts that the best in class LLMs can sort of spit out meaningful responses. And that's a good way to orient yourself toward like how the world is, where the world is heading. So I would do those two things. I would use code, write code with the help of AI, and I would do early stage AI with small projects around like prompt engineering. And I think both of those will like make it really great.
Super. That's
you.
great.
Thank
Yeah,
you for
really
the answers.
actionable.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Vijay, for the question too. So this has been really good. I mean, we literally have 50 people still on the call, 15 minutes past the scheduled end time. So I think a couple things that we can follow up on. One is, would really, really appreciate, Ritendra, if you are able, if you have time this weekend, for you to kind of answer the questions in the Taro Q&A. That'll help a ton of people. And then if you're open to it, at some point in 2024, would love to figure out a round 2 of this. So as we wrap up here, would love for you to share where can people follow you, or anything you can plug if people want to connect with you more. I put the links, the relevant links, in the chat, but would love to hear from you directly about where.
Yeah, I
how to
think
follow up.
I'm more active on Medium than Substack.
Okay,
But
I'll link your
I think,
Medium.
yeah, Medium is like it's pretty interesting. And then I am happy to come back whenever you want me to. I can cover. I mean, it's easier for me to like answer live questions, because then I can clarify if I don't understand the question and so on. So I'm happy to come back whenever you want. This is the least I can do for the community. So yeah, feel free to schedule time with me for more sessions. And yeah, follow me on Medium and Substack, and also LinkedIn. I mean, I just parting words. I really enjoy these questions, because I went through all of these myself, and like I didn't have any way to like get these. And thank you, Rahul, for like building this platform. I think you're just making it so much easier for people to like really fast track their instead of finding things the hard way, they just are hearing from all these people that you bring to the forum.
Yeah. I mean, I do think that it's so rare for people, especially early in career, even a senior staff engineer. It's actually quite, it's so valuable to have the exposure and advice from someone like you. So really appreciate you doing this. Can we all do like a reaction for Ritendra, like a clap thing over here? This is great. Okay.
All right.
So enjoy the practice for the play. Hopefully, if you feel it's good enough, tell me, and I'll tell the Taro community about this play. It sounds like it's in the Bay Area. So really appreciate you doing this. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, everyone, for spending your time. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Ritendra. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Oh wait, just a
Bye.
question about the QA role is on the Taro page, right? Not